My name's Danny Abel-Hauer. I'm a senior lecturer in performance here at Sheffield Hallam University, and I'm supposed to be delivering my talk today with Charlie Davis, who's the director of SkatePal, but unfortunately he's very sick. So he came up last night and has got progressively worse over the night and is basically stuck in bed now. So I'm going to do my best to fulfill his excellent role. He does feature in some of the films, so you will see him, but in a non-live form. So apologies about that. So I'd like to start by giving you a little bit of a history about skateboarding. Skateboarding began in Californian surfing communities, offering a physical practice that resembles, to some extent, the riding of waves, but one that could be used on the streets and gave surfers something to practice on when there was no swell. Freestyle skateboarding tricks, which involved the performing of turns and balances, became popular as the skateboard came into its own as an item of play equipment. And as far as the popular stories go, it wasn't until the innovation of a rogue crew of surfers, the Zephyr Boys, that skateboarding developed into the modern ramp practice we can still see today. The Zephyr Boys' approach to skateboarding was much more akin to their surfing practice. They performed cutbacks and crouched low on their boards, running their hands along the concrete as if they were running their fingers through water. This image is of Peggy Oakey, a Zephyr Boy. She was one of the crew of skateboarders, and obviously I like to include her image because she was the only woman in the group. During periods of prolonged drought in LA during the 1960s and 1970s, the Zephyr team would sneak into the backyards of wealthy LA property owners and use their empty pools as a very different form of skateboarding terrain. This appropriation led to the creation of entirely new forms of physical practice, particularly the riding of transition and vertical skateboarding, and the use of the edge of the pool, its coping, for rocks, grinds and slides. As skateboarding's popularity grew, helped particularly by Craig Stezik and his documentation of the Z-Boys in Skateboarder magazine during the mid to late 1970s, skate parks began to be built all over the world that replicated the physical spaces and the transitions of backyard pools from which the practice had emerged. So this is Tony Alva skating one of these backyard pools. And the way I think about this is that there's a little bit of LA in every single skate park that exists, which is kind of interesting, as a sort of migratory practice. Skateboarding's roots as a street practice also continue to develop, with skateboarders holding to the freedom and innovation of repurposing urban places and street objects for their own alternative use. In the 1980s and 1990s, as skateboarding became more strongly connected to the fast-paced, aggressive and injurious forms of physical practice, skateboarding also became recognised as a form of righteous civil disobedience, a practicing of a right to the city, and at times, a practice of antisocial behaviour, and in the worst cases, criminal activity. This desire to assert a right to the city has a long history in the works of philosophers and the practices of artists, perhaps most notably in the work of the Situationist International, who were interested in the city as a playful rather than a rational place, who denounced their perception of a society controlled and dictated by business interests and formed an alliance against the participating in the production and distribution of capital. Sous le pavé la plage, excuse my really bad French, under the pavement the beach, which Malcolm Miles attributes to Henri Lefebvre, was a slogan adopted by the Situationists, as well as protesters during the May to June Paris riots of 1968, which can be interpreted as a call to action, one that implies force, the literal lifting and moving of paving stones as representative of uprooting capitalist society and its suppression of social life. Nicholas Wybrow remarks that the slogan was also adopted by the first generation of skateboarders in California, who lived out the slogan through co-opting the backyards of rich LA homeowners and revisioning schoolyards, backyards and streets as a kind of urban beach in their flowing practice through concrete and asphalt waves. The practice of skateboarding has continued since then to become reshaped and oriented in a range of ways. In the last decade, skateboarding has begun to take a philanthropic turn, with charities like SkatePal, Skatistan and Skate Aid, amongst others, building skate parks and running skateboarding classes for local children in areas affected by war, extended conflict and in disadvantaged communities, where there's generally not the money to provide suitable facilities or safe, democratic places for play. In the summer of 2014, I was writing up my PhD thesis, and at that time, Israel were implementing Operation Protective Edge, a military intervention in the besieged city of Gaza, during which over 2,000 Gazans, 67 Israeli soldiers and 5 Israeli citizens were killed, and more than 10,600 Gazans, 469 IDF and 261 Israeli citizens were wounded. Between sentences and paragraphs, I would flick between catching up with the news and flicking through my Instagram account. One video on Instagram caught my attention. It was published by Sidewalk magazine and showed Welsh professional skateboarder Chris Jones performing a backside board slide on a rail outside a shop in Ramallah. Reading that Instagram video alongside my own personal experience of the West Bank and of the history of skateboarding, and given the current outbreak of violence, I felt strangely hopeful. In one way, because I recognised that people would be visiting and witnessing the West Bank and the effects of the occupation. But also, and perhaps more implicitly, I recognise skateboarding as a movement that can be critical and disruptive on a socio-political level, as well as therapeutic and freeing on a personal level. Of course, the news about the latest outbreak of violence in Gaza was considered worthy of international attention in several major news platforms. But the everyday effects of Israel's occupation of Palestinian land and livelihoods is rarely granted the same. The situation for Palestinians is complex and can be thought of as occurring within at least 6 sets of circumstances: Gaza, the Jerusalem question, the West Bank, Palestinian citizens of Israel, Palestinian refugees, and the Palestinian diaspora. The history of the Palestine-Israel conflict and any solutions to it are a major international concern and point of contestation within academic and populist discourse. When I discovered Chris Jones' Instagram video, I found out that he was visiting Ramallah to work with a charity who had recently begun to create skate parks and teach children to skateboard in the West Bank. That charity was SkatePal. I got in touch with Charlie to find out more, and in the summer of 2015, I went to work with them to build a skate park in a town called Asira Ash-Shamaliya in the north of the West Bank. That initial visit led me to begin a research project into the practice and benefits of skateboarding for young people in Palestine, and the effect of relationships between SkatePal volunteers and the local community. So this is where I pass over to Charlie. Charlie started the charity when he began going over to teach English in Jenin. He comes from Edinburgh. He's a Scottish skateboarder, and his parents sort of encouraged him to go over and to do this kind of English classes in Jenin. He's a skateboarder, so he would take his skateboard with him, and the kids just really wanted to try it out. And he noticed that they were really interested in what he was doing, so he started building some small obstacles and teaching them how to do a few tricks. And then that slowly became part of a much bigger project when he could see the real benefit in this kind of activity and providing play activity for children. And so he started then working with municipal councils to get hold of land and to build proper skate parks. Now, one of the first things that he did with Theo, who became a kind of close partner of Charlie in the SkatePal project, was to create a film called Epically Palestine. This is a term that comes from skateboarding culture and references an existing film. And it's the idea of it is that it's presenting the kind of existing landscape of Palestinian skateboarding. So this film kind of introduced the skateboarding scene. There were already a small group of skateboarders within Palestine, and Charlie wanted to support and develop these connections. So the reason that skateboarding became a kind of important activity to bring to this particular area was because it's firstly quite an inclusive activity. Although obviously that's never 100% possible, there are obviously lots of issues around gender and race involvement in sporting activities and in skateboarding. But generally speaking, skateboarding practitioners are quite welcoming and inclusive, relatively speaking. There's a lack of hierarchy. You don't have this connection with coaches. You don't have the same sort of relationship to parents that you have in other types of sport. There's a huge aspect of self-discipline to skateboarding practice. It helps to develop self-worth and social identity. And skate parks function as quite a safe space in which to kind of meet up with other people and practice. So I'm going to just show you a video, the first video, which is of Basma. So this video was created to introduce you to one of the children who's benefited from skate parks in Palestine, in particular the one in Asira that we built.
أنا بحب السكيت لأنه ممتع وباجي على السكيت وبضيع وقت. أنا بحب المتطوعين لأنهم بيعلموني حركات وهم يعني شاطرين وأنا رح أصير زيهم في المستقبل. 10 البنات الذين يلعبون في السكيت في عصيرة. أنا بحكي للبنات البنت يعني لآخر مرة إنه تستمر في السكيت. بس لما تعرفت على السكيت صرت أستمتع بأوقاتي وأعرف يعني وين بدي أروح. في العطلة ما كنت أعرف وين بدي أطلع فهلأ صرت أعرف. أنا بحكي للي بدهم يجوا على فلسطين إنهم ما يخافوا من إشي يعني يحاولوا يلعبوا سكيت.
Skateboarding is a practice that's quite hard to define. It's a playful, everyday street activity, including freestyle and downhill skateboarding, but there's also a sporting, competitive side. In 2016, the International Olympic Committee announced that skateboarding would be one of the new sports included in the 2020 Tokyo Olympic Games, prompting a wave of commentary on social media and on skateboarding and mainstream news platforms, including a petition against the decision. But what is apparent across skateboarding culture, historically and into the present, is that perfect technical ability never trumps the exhibition of personal style, the performing of a trick in an innovative way or in a place it has never been done. Whether skateboarders are taking apart roller skates and attaching them to 2x4 pieces of wood, jumping over fences to make use of empty backyard pools, repurposing architectural street furniture, or developing endless new combinations of jumping, flipping, sliding, grinding and turning, skateboarding is inherently a flexible and creative medium of expression. And there's a correlation between creativity and resilience, the process of bending and rebounding to overcome adversity. Einat Metzel and Melissa Morrill link creativity with resilience in the way that both creative adaptation and resilience involve functioning in a uniquely positive manner that takes the environment and specific context into account. And there's also a link between movement and psychological well-being. Dance and movement therapists who are specially trained to work with people who are survivors of trauma acknowledge the potential of movement to engage participants in flow, a theory developed by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi to achieve relaxation and or release of emotion and aggression, as well as exploring how trauma is experienced and held within the body and how changing movement might help to relieve it. What is apparent from regularly visiting the West Bank is the proximity of a tense, uncertain and fearful realpolitik within which people operate. Border areas are punctuated by architectures of restriction and exclusion and the presence of the Israeli military. The separation wall, checkpoints, administrative practices and area delineation within the West Bank, A, B and C, create complex rhythms of restriction and separation between Palestinian villages that Palestinians embody through a regulated practicing of power upon individuals and the collective social body. Palestinian communities are regularly engaged in a variety of forms of resistance and protest. Rania Javad writes, "Every area threatened with demolitions or land confiscation becomes a point of confrontation where local Palestinian residents are resisting Israeli state actions. Protests, including the strategy of weekly Friday demonstrations, continue in a number of villages and in areas of East Jerusalem under threat of Israeli settlement." So as a form of movement, physical movement, and as a kind of community centre, as a creative practice and as a form of release, skateboarding has much to offer Palestinian people. Charlie's development of SkatePal began with his first summer camp in 2013, which was in Sharek in Ramallah. And this was just a very simple mini ramp set up, and children would kind of learn to skate this very basic transition. Their first skate park took place in Zababde, which is in the north of the West Bank, in 2014. And then came their first and biggest skate park to date, which is the one in Asira Shamalia, which we've seen in the Basma video, and that took place in 2015. The next video clip I want to show you is from a film made by Vice called Post-Radical, which features professional skateboarder Rick McCrank. So he visited the West Bank, he explored the skate parks that SkatePal had been building, and also an organisation called Skate Keelia. And so this gives you an opportunity to see the park and some of the different children who have kind of attend regularly.
It's been awesome. It's like a community space and everyone comes and has a really good time here and got a great vibe. I've been really impressed by how many girls there are, and it's like on par with the guys, and the standard of the girls skating here is really good to see it too. I've been really blown away by that.
Obviously I love skating, I'm a skater. But during the whole process of doing a build and like doing classes with the kids, you come to realise all the facets that skateboarding works with. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl, it doesn't matter who wins or who loses. It generates a vibe of helping each other and a vibe of inclusivity. And that's why globally it's such a family atmosphere.
انت بتيجي السكيت بارك في عسيرة دائما وكل
دائما
بعد المدرسة ولا؟
بعد المدرسة.
Okay.
I love seeing like new kids, so every time I come up I don't know most of these kids because they've all started quite recently. It's just great to see that people are passing on to their friends and like word's getting around. Ultimately, seeing kids having a good time on the board is just what the aim of the whole SkatePal project is all about.
مرات بيجي 5 ساعات ومرات يعني أكثر. أما أقل يعني مستحيل.
هون هي حلوة سكيت، هو منظرها حلو وموقعها جميل. بس لا خبري أنا طبشت مرتين هون.
أيوة.
I think it's amazing what Charlie's done here with SkatePal and the volunteers. I think it takes a lot to leave your home, your country, and go somewhere completely foreign and just give them your all. It's really commendable.
Okay, so SkatePal has garnered quite a lot of attention from different organisations and groups. So last year, the Isle Skateboards team came over to Palestine to tour, and they made a really beautiful video while they were visiting. As well, this is a picture of one of the riders, Casper Brooker. This is the latest skate park project. This is a town called Jayus, which is also in the north of the West Bank. It's very close to the border of Israel. You can't access Israel from the town, but it's very close to it. This park was built in collaboration with a Palestinian NGO called Skate Kelia. So there's quite a lot of partnership that happens between Skate Pal and municipal councils and groups and organisations that are there within the West Bank. And that's probably one of the best aspects of Skate Pal, really, is their ability to forge really good connections with local people. So this is not work that's parachuted in. This is these are projects that have a very long backstory of relationship with local people, which I think is extremely important. Skate Pal also partnered with Long Live South Bank, which is a campaign in London to preserve the Undercroft skate area on the South Bank, and Reverb, which is a sort of skateboarding and academia group, which I'm part of. And we created Pushing Borders earlier this year, which was a great success. It was a sort of skateboarding and academia conference, and there were lots of panels around different aspects of skateboarding culture to generate critical conversations, really, about skateboarding practice. So all of these aspects, the sort of things that ripple out of Skate Pal, make people aware of the politics of the situation. They create an empathetic network, just to follow on from Henry's point, really, and they broaden an understanding of the Middle East and people that live there, in contrast to kind of mainstream news, which tends to present quite a narrow representation. The expanded field of creative practice, whether that's in visual art, theatre, performance or dance, or in the broad and everyday creative activities such as cooking, DIY and skateboarding even, offer a space in which to express, understand and come to terms with experiences and feelings. I've seen this in the artwork exhibited at Al Mamal Foundation in Jerusalem, or at Banksy's Walled-Off Hotel in Bethlehem, or at the Palestinian Museum in Bir Zayt. The work of Palestinian artists is often explicitly or implicitly permeated by the situation. This is Goya in Jerusalem by Mohammed Khalil, a pictorial representation of events in East Jerusalem. But strangely enough, it was his painting Two Friends, which I saw in Jerusalem in 2017, that was most effective to me. The exhibition text referring to the collection read, Mohammed Khalil's The Mundane departs from all that is directly political in the most politicised city on earth, and chooses to capture the details of daily life that pass unnoticed and bring them back to the centre of attention, inviting a world that is oblivious to such details to observe and contemplate. For me, this painting spoke volumes about what I was observing in the West Bank, the everyday effect of ongoing oppression and disadvantage, young people's feelings of being stuck in a place that had no future for them, and the contrast in being able to see people in relatively stable and privileged socio-political circumstances via the internet. Razan Akrawami, a performance artist and student, staged a performance called The Scarecrow on a rooftop in the Sheikh Jarrah neighbourhood of Jerusalem in 2011. The area of Sheikh Jarrah was, in September 2010, at the centre of a dispute over ownership of homes in which Palestinian families have been living since Jordanian control of East Jerusalem. The ruling claimed Jewish ownership of the land and laid the legal foundation for eviction of Palestinian families from the area and the settlement of Jews in the neighbourhood. Akrawami's practice articulates her body as a site of resistance, and the choice of referencing the symbol of a scarecrow suggests the dehumanisation of Palestinian people as part of conflict discourse. Volunteers who have worked with Skate Pal have also created their own creative responses to their experience in Palestine and Israel, including several blogs, illustrated or photographic magazines and films. Many of these creative pieces are a celebration of Palestinian culture and an ode to the individuals and families that volunteers have made bonds with. Creative works also often reflect on the situation, offering another perspective in creative response to the political circumstances of the West Bank. Barcelona-based painter Joshua Perkin, who volunteered in 2015 and 2017 with Skatepal, created a series of portraits and scenes of everyday life in Jayus, which was subsequently published in Vague Skateboarding magazine. His paintings show simple scenes of people sitting together, talking and sipping coffee, sitting on the roadside, working in the fields, and they include captions in Arabic and Spanish with simple statements. In his text about the collection, Chris Jones writes, "Whilst sights like these are common and may not appear out of the ordinary at first, once we contextualise these initial observations, we gain a deeper understanding of their importance and the ways in which they can be interpreted." Jones then discusses some of the everyday effects of the occupation, particularly challenges for travel around the West Bank due to checkpoint closures, land confiscation and destruction of homes and other buildings, the routine arresting of Palestinian youth without charge, and social paternalism that particularly affects Palestinian women and girls. Jones concludes that Perkins' paintings examine the passive, active and future meanings of what it is to be occupied under Israel and to occupy oneself in pastime and simple pleasures. Discussing his work, Perkin explains, "I usually create images that have an ambiguity in terms of visual narrative and purpose. Confronting subjects so delicate as this one, I think that becomes really important because it subsequently removes the possible interpretation and intention to provide answers. Rather, it simply attempts to draw the viewer's attention to the subject matter with the intention of this creating further discussion." As an artist researcher, I've also created my own responses to my experience in Israel-Palestine. I'd like to share one of these with you, which is a short film I've made over the past 12 months. It's called The Slide, and it depicts a woman driving across the West Bank through a checkpoint into Israel, to Tel Aviv, and then to the beach to collect seawater. The film draws on my connection to Skatepal, and it references the politics of water across the occupied Palestinian territories, which are a potentially devastating aspect of the conflict and have been reported upon by numerous Palestinian sources and Beit Salem, the Israeli Information Centre for Human Rights in the occupied territories. Fair access to clean water is, of course, a humanitarian necessity, but relatedly, as much as Palestinians in the West Bank are restricted in terms of a vital water supply, they are also restricted in their ability to leave the West Bank and to gain access to another body of water, one that is often visible from the mountains in the West Bank, the Mediterranean Sea. This may seem to be a trivial issue, but to return for a moment to the Situationists, the Paris protesters, to Henri Lefebvre and to Californian skateboarders, political phrase, "under the pavement, the beach." There is a symbolic significance attached to the sea that is representative of basic natural freedoms, of breathing deeply, of relaxation and of joy. The Slide converges the flows of skateboarding's history with the politics of water and freedom in the West Bank, themes that sit in dialogue with my familial connection to the Israeli-Palestine conflict. I'm a British Palestinian woman, a daughter of the diaspora. Having been born in the UK with all the security and privilege of that position and holding a British passport, I am able to slip, often uncomfortably, between the UK, Israel and the West Bank. So SkatePal's future plans are that they're working on a build in Ramallah, which will serve, this is a shot of some of the local skaters who, most of them are not from Ramallah, but they occupy a lot of time. There's a really good square in the centre of Ramallah where you can skate. And one of the guys, Aram, is going to run the skate parks and manage the volunteers who come each year as well. SkatePal also have developed, because of their work, other organisations have sort of come out of SkatePal, like Free Movement Skateboarding, who are operating in Athens in refugee camps, and also an organisation called Women Skate the World, which supports women to get involved with these kinds of projects. But I suppose, just to summarise then, skateboarding really engages with, in particular, the right to play and the right to public assembly. But the Declaration of Human Rights also includes the right to culture and freedom of expression. Culture and creative expression offer a symbolic realm of meaning that can help communities to form, work together and develop. They can function as a tool for assembly and gathering and for learning about and respecting difference. And they can offer a means of expressing, of processing experience, sometimes of a difficult or traumatic nature, of coming to terms with feelings, of exploring possible routes out of circumstances, and through engaging with audiences, the ability to trigger responses. As singer-songwriter and actor Shayna Taub believes, theatre and art, and I would say any form of creativity, are engines for empathy. Thank you.
In my particular case, although I'm a very informed person and I knew about Palestine, I only became more interested when my son Douglas actually went to build a skate park in Syria. And then I started getting more involved, more interested in that whole thing, and visited us just recently. And it made me wonder the extent to which you can use skateboarding as a mechanism for raising awareness amongst the constituents of people who don't normally know about skateboarding, or indeed on what's happening in Palestine. So what you've had, the volunteers are generally young, 20s, 30 years old. And that's really interesting that they engage with young people back home in that age group. But I wonder the extent to which systematically a wider constituency in older generation have also been made and made aware of human rights abuses in Palestine. The other aspect of this is the extent to which skateboarding can be used as a mechanism for bringing together skateboarders from Israel with skateboarders in Palestine. Now in Israel, I've been to Tel Aviv recently, there were wonderful skate parks. And of course the discrepancy between Israel and Palestine is very obvious until the skate parks are didn't build in Palestine. But is there also a role for bringing together young people from Israel and Palestine through skateboarding and making young Israelis aware of what's going on in Palestine, which they might not be aware of?
Yeah, I'm going to address your second point first, which is about interaction between Israeli and Palestinian skateboarders. There's an issue around normalisation of the conflict, which we have to be very careful of working with SkatePal. We have to be sensitive to everyone's politics. For Palestinian people, a lot of Palestinian people don't want to see relationships normalised because they want to make it clear to an international community that everything is not all right, that there is a problem, there is a political problem, and that there are the issues that need to be raised. And people feel like if they just start to let go of that, and if they start to just kind of have a normal relationship with Israel, that those political issues that are very much there tend to get sort of ignored or ridden over or whatever. So that sort of relationship could not come from us as an international group operating within Palestine. It has to come between Palestinians and Israelis themselves, and we could never seek to initiate that. Having travelled in Israel, I know that a lot of young people that I've spoken to don't necessarily completely understand what it's like in the West Bank, and Israelis are not encouraged to go to the West Bank. They're forbidden, in fact. It's considered dangerous to them, despite the fact that there are lots of people who are Israeli living in the West Bank in settlements. So it's a really complex situation, and one that I think certainly SkatePal doesn't want to encroach upon as an international group. So what we're doing is we're setting up a situation where we are doing something with the Palestinian community, and then because we're there in the country, we are also engaging with people in Israel as well. But we can't do that. We can't do that bridge. So that's my first response really there. And with regards to what is kind of sent back to those communities beyond Palestine when volunteers return home, I think that's really interesting. And obviously I can't speak for every volunteer, but one thing that I do think really stands out is that Palestinian society is extremely welcoming. It's a slower pace of life to, for example, the UK. And people are much more family-oriented. They are extremely kind, and they're very warm and welcoming. And there's this sense of sort of operating in a slightly different way and being more community-minded. I think that's something that I've gotten out of coming back from Palestine. But I also think that it's important to highlight work like the work that I know that you're doing, and trying to kind of connect, for example, Sheffield with Asira, and kind of looking at ways that the volunteers have actually created projects that connect with or trying to create connections with Palestine in their own cities and towns. And I think that's a really positive aspect. But obviously, I can't really speak any more than that for volunteers. Yeah, so I'm hoping to. I've been speaking with a gallery in Jerusalem and trying to put together a series of an exhibition and maybe some screenings and performance work that kind of involves Palestinian artists and people connected to SkatePal and other international people who are kind of making work in response to this. I'm very interested in creative responses to political circumstances and how people deal with their experience of political situations through kind of creative work. So hopefully it would come out in that kind of form.
Thank you for such beautiful work. It's
Thank
the first
you.
day. And then just some basic questions I've had about the skate parks as space, and the question of the right to the city, and the way this so beautifully joins with the visual art, people using this space and painting the murals around it. And I wondered if music or Palestinian hip hop, I'm just thinking about youth culture that I know about happening in Palestine, and if do kids or teens come together and use that space in these other ways, or is it a question of managing the space so that it's devoted to skating?
Yeah, so it's a really good point, and Palestinian youth culture is very vibrant and really interesting at the moment, and it's something I'd like to explore in a lot more detail. The skate park, the way that SkatePal run these parks is it's very much handed over to the local community. There's no charge for people to be there. It's a real community centre. When during the summer months especially, families go up there, groups of kids, people are playing music, they are kind of doing parkour sometimes. They're not just skating. There's like all sorts of things happen around the skate park. So it's a real site for all sorts of different creative expression, actually. And so, yeah, that is happening, and it's something that I think should be explored even further, because there is such a vibrancy there, and also because it's a trans, I believe it's a trans national sort of youth culture that's going on. You know, it's something that there is this Palestinian connection to hip hop music, and there's a lot of kind of influence from hip hop, which is to do with lots of things, but also skate parks are a sort of US cultural export, if you like. So there's this kind of really interesting relationship to that. And if you think about the US role in international politics, you know, my initial thought was, are people going to like this? Are they going to see this as like a sort of, as a US cultural export, like we don't want this? But people don't perceive it in that way. They see it as an activity. And what I've really noticed about Palestinian people in this conflict is their ability to separate people and governments, you know, and like just to recognise that people are people, you know. That's...
Yeah, for sure. And also, do you think it's also that, you know, skating and hip-hop are both, they come out of the unauthorized use of space, the unauthorized and unwelcome forms of creative expression in the US, you know, so in a way, it's not only that they're distinct, but it has that kind of countercultural power that maybe is part of its ability to. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. Yeah, and I think it'd be a really interesting thing to explore more, I think. Thank you.
And it's a bit off the wall. We talked about, when we were talking about this, we talked about institutional links between institutions there and Hallam. And what I'm wondering is whether there are elements of what you've got here which could help to develop institutional programs around creativity within universities, colleges, whatever. No idea, please forgive me, I don't know what the setup is, but it seems to me that you've got something absolutely outstanding here, and to try and embed that to help develop and leave something behind within an institution and linking that may be an opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to talk to that, I want to just say that Pete Jones is leading the Palestine Education Network at Sheffield Hallam, and we have been discussing this. So when I was over in Palestine this year, I met with academics at Bir Zayt University, which is near to Ramallah. I met with academics at An-Najjar University, which is in Nablus, which is very close to the skate park in Asira. And they're really keen to connect with us, but particularly around creative writing, use of the skate park, site-based performance. And so actually the film is sort of a representation of those things coming together. And I did speak to people about that idea of working to look at student creative responses and like wider sort of public creative responses to the situation and sharing ideas across the two places. So it is something that we're thinking about and working with actually at the moment, again in relation with Stella as well. There's a few people in the room that are part of this sort of network of doing things. So it's something that we're exploring, but haven't yet managed to manifest.
I think this is where the very large sports department of British Council that funds partnerships of this type and institutional linking and development. And sounds like it's remarkable. I'll get hold of some of those contacts and I'll send them.
That would be great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I can just add to that. The two projects currently underway are in development. One with Sheffield Hallam in terms of science education project, which will involve universities in Palestine if it's successful in its application.
Space I've done yet.